This photograph was taken in 1871 at the Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts. The girl in the image is Katherine Doyle, only 9 years old. But look closely, her eyes, at her rigid posture, at the expression no child should ever wear. Katherine Doyle defied everything doctors of the Victorian era thought they knew about the human mind. Her case remains unexplainable even today, more than 150 years later. This picture captured one of the most disturbing medical mysteries of the 19th century. What happened to Katherine Doyle can't be explained by modern medicine, or even by psychology, and maybe it can never be fully understood, but her story goes far beyond any ordinary case. It questions the very limits of human reality. To understand Katherine's story, we need to return to 1871. America was still recovering from the Civil War, which had ended only 6 years earlier. Boston was a city in transition, filled with Irish immigrants escaping famine and poverty in search of a new life. Psychiatric medicine was in its infancy, brutal, primitive, and often cruel. Asylums were dark places, where people who didn't fit society's idea of normal were locked away and forgotten. The Danver State Hospital, where Katherine would spend her final years, was one of those grim institutions. Built on land once owned by Salem Farms, it carried not only the weight of primitive medicine, but also the shadows of American history. Its halls had witnessed so-called treatments that today would be considered torture: prolonged cold baths, heavy restraints, sensory isolation, and questionable experiments. It was in this harsh, limited world that Katherine Doyle became one of the most infamous cases in 19th century psychiatry. And while many of the doctors meant well, they simply lacked the tools or knowledge to grasp what they were seeing. Katherine was born on March 15, 1862, in Boston. She was the daughter of Patrick and Mary Doyle, Irish immigrants who came to America, chasing hope for a better life. Patrick worked long hours as a dock laborer at Boston Harbor, while Mary worked as a maid and cook in the fine homes of Beacon Hill. The family lived in a cramped two-room apartment in the city's North End, a poor but close-knit Irish Catholic neighborhood. Katherine's childhood, by all accounts, was normal. She played with rag dolls, helped her mother with chores, and attended Mass every Sunday at St. Leonard's Church. Her school teachers described her as a dedicated student, not exceptional, but bright and curious. Family memories painted her as a sweet, affectionate child who worried when her father came home late and loved helping her mother in the kitchen. Patrick once called her the light of our house, but in September of 1869, something changed so suddenly, so drastically, that it still baffles doctors and historians today. On Tuesday morning, September 14th, Mary Doyle woke up to a daughter who was no longer the same child. Physically, she looked unchanged. Her freckled face, her curly brown hair, her small 7-year-old frame were all the same. But something fundamental had shifted overnight. The first signs were subtle. She woke later than usual, which was strange for a child who had always risen early. When she came to breakfast, she moved differently, slower, more deliberate, as though every step was planned. And instead of greeting her parents with the usual cheerful "Good morning, Mommy," "Good morning, Daddy," she sat silently at the table and stared at them with an expression Mary later described as empty, but impossibly old. When asked if she felt well, Katherine spoke, but her voice had changed, not drastically, but enough to notice. It sounded deeper, older, rougher than before. In the weeks that followed, the transformation became undeniable. She began displaying knowledge no child of her her background could possibly have. At the dinner table, she casually mentioned details about the Revolutionary War with shocking accuracy. She spoke about battles as though she had seen them firsthand. She quoted Aristotle and Plato with genuine understanding, not like someone repeating memorized words. When her father asked where she learned such things, Katherine only smiled a smile that unsettled her parents and answered, "I've always known them." Her knowledge of religion also expanded in ways no one could explain. She could recite entire passages from the Bible in Latin complex scripture. Even priests had to look up. Father O'Brien of St. Leonard's tested her, and was stunned when Katherine debated theology with the depth of a trained scholar. Most disturbing of all, she seemed to know the private lives of people around her, secrets she could never have overheard. She revealed hidden debts, troubled marriages, and private sins of neighbors without hesitation. But it wasn't just knowledge. Something darker was taking hold. Katherine developed a fascination with death and suffering, an obsession completely foreign to the sweet child her parents once knew. She asked chillingly precise questions about execution methods, medieval torture devices, and fatal diseases. She described the Spanish Inquisition, assassination techniques, and even Egyptian mummification with disturbing accuracy. And when she spoke about these things, her eyes seemed to light up. She smiled not with the innocence of a child, but with something cold, calculated, almost cruel. It was clear, Katherine Doyle was no longer the same little girl. Katherine's behavior grew even more disturbing. She began deliberately hurting herself, scratching until her skin bled, biting her lips raw, even slamming her head against walls hard enough to leave marks. What terrified her parents most wasn't the violence, but her reaction. She showed no pain. Instead, she seemed almost euphoric, as though physical suffering gave her a twisted kind of pleasure. Mary tried desperately to stop her, but Katherine always found new ways. She used broken glass, loose nails, kitchen tools, anything within reach. When asked why, she gave only chilling answers. Because I want to. Or worse, because something tells me to. Her relationship with animals changed too. The girl who once loved feeding stray cats and petting the neighbor's dog now terrified every creature around her. Dogs barked when she approached. Cats fled at the sight of her. Even birds seemed to avoid the air near her. When Mary asked why animals behaved this way, Katherine gave a cold smile and whispered, "They know what I am now, Mommy. They're smarter than you." As the months passed, her strangeness went beyond knowledge and behavior. She began showing physical abilities no child should have. The first sign was her sudden strength. In December of 1869, during a fit of rage, Katherine snapped a solid oak chair in half with her bare hands. Patrick, who worked daily with heavy timber at the docks, examined the splintered wood in disbelief. No 7-year-old girl could have produced that kind of force. Soon after, she left deep impressions of her fingertips carved into the family's wooden kitchen table. Mary tried to sand them out, but they were too deep. The marks remained a permanent scar of her daughter's impossible strength. She also showed unnatural endurance. Once Mary found her standing in the living room at 2 in the morning, perfectly still, staring at the wall. Katherine calmly said she had been standing there since dinner, more than 6 hours without moving. Her resistance to cold was even more alarming. Through the brutal Boston winter of 1869 to 70, she wandered outdoors in little more than a nightgown, unaffected by freezing winds that left her neighbors shivering. Patrick once found her asleep in the snow, barefooted, untouched by frostbite. But most terrifying of all were her eyes. Neighbors began whispering that there was something predatory in her stare. Those who looked too long said they felt dizzy, nauseous, overcome with an unshakable fear. Mary noticed that Katherine's eyes, normally brown, sometimes turned nearly black during her worst episodes, and on certain nights. She swore she saw shapes shifting inside her pupils, like something else was staring back. At their breaking point, Patrick and Mary sought help. As devout Catholics, they turned first to the church. Father Timothy O'Brien of St. Leonard's had baptized Katherine, guided her first communion, and remembered her as one of the sweetest children he had ever known. At first, he dismissed the parents' stories as exaggerations of worried minds. That changed the moment he met Katherine himself. When Father O'Brien visited their home in January 1870, he expected to find a troubled child. Instead, he was confronted with something he could not explain. Katherine questioned Catholic doctrine with sharp, sophisticated arguments. She revealed private sins and buried doubts from the priest's past, things he had never confessed to another soul. When he demanded to know how she knew these things, Katherine only smiled and said, "I know many things about many people." Terrified, the priest agreed to perform an exorcism. The ritual took place in February, inside the Doyle home, with only the family and an elderly deacon present. What happened that night haunted Father O'Brien for the rest of his life. In his private diary, discovered decades later, he wrote simply, "It was the most terrifying experience of my priesthood, unlike the possessed described in religious texts." Katherine showed no agony, no writhing, no curses or blasphemy. Instead, she laughed, a deep, echoing laugh that seemed to come from more than one voice at once. Then, as Father O'Brien recited the holy words, Katherine began chanting them to line by line in perfect Latin, always one step ahead of him. The exorcism failed. Shaken and broken, the priest admitted he could not help. Desperate, the Doyles turned to science. They sought out Dr. Henry Morrison, one of Boston's few physicians specializing in mental illness. Educated in Europe, Morrison was known for his methodical, scientific approach. At first, he suspected trauma, or perhaps the brilliance of an unusually gifted child, but his doubts evaporated as soon as he met Katherine. For 2 weeks in early 1870, Morrison examined her daily, keeping detailed notes that survive in Boston's historical archives. What he recorded was chilling. Katherine's intelligence was undeniable, but it was focused entirely on darkness. She described human anatomy with the precision of a medical student. She named rare diseases with exact symptoms. She even suggested experimental treatments that were just beginning to appear in European medical journals. When given paper, she filled it with drawings and words. But her sketches were not flowers or houses like other children her age. Instead, she drew skeletal figures, scenes of death and decay, twisted bodies locked in agony. Her art was disturbingly accurate, far too advanced for an untrained child. Even more unnerving were her writings. She scrawled fluently in multiple languages. She had never studied Latin, ancient Greek, even fragments of Egyptian hieroglyphs. When asked how she learned these strange languages, Katherine calmly said the words just came to her when she needed them. But what unsettled Dr. Morrison most wasn't her speech, was her eyes. In his notes, he described an overwhelming discomfort whenever she stared at him, as if he was being judged by something ancient and far wiser than a child could ever be. His examinations also uncovered disturbing physical oddities. Katherine's body temperature was always below normal, yet she showed no signs of hypothermia. Her pulse was unusually slow, steady, and strong. Stranger still, plants in his office began to wilt whenever she stayed too long, even though nothing else in the room changed. The event that finally pushed the Doyles to commit Katherine happened on a bitterly cold February night in 1870, an incident so terrifying it silenced even the biggest skeptics. At 3 a.m., Patrick Doyle awoke with a sense of dread. The house was unnervingly quiet, and the air felt colder than it should, even in the middle of a Boston winter. When he went to check on his daughter, her bed was empty. After frantically searching the house, Patrick spotted her through the kitchen window. Katherine was standing perfectly still in the snow-covered backyard, wearing nothing but a thin cotton nightgown. The blizzard had been raging for hours, and snow had already piled on her small frame. She stood with her arms raised to the sky, her head tilted back, as if embracing the storm itself. Patrick rushed outside, certain she'd be frozen to death. But when he reached her, Katherine wasn't shivering. She was breathing normally, wide awake, and showed no discomfort. Her skin was icy to the touch, yet her body functioned as if nothing was wrong. When Patrick tried to pull her inside, she slowly turned her face toward him. What he saw would haunt him forever. Her eyes were completely black, no whites, no irises, just endless darkness. And when she spoke, her voice seemed to echo from the very air around them, not just from her throat. She whispered words Patrick would repeat to doctors for the rest of his life. "The stars are almost aligned, Father. When they are in the proper place, you'll finally understand." Katherine never existed. She was only preparation for something far greater. By dawn, after hours of debate with Father O'Brien and Dr. Morrison, the Doyles made the most painful decision of their lives. Katherine would be admitted to Danver State Hospital. Father O'Brien admitted his faith had no answer for her condition. Dr. Morrison confessed he was out of his depth and needed the hospital's resources to study her. For Patrick and Mary, surrendering their only daughter felt like a death. But they knew she was becoming dangerous to herself and to others. Danvers Hospital, chosen for its reputation as one of New England's most advanced institutions, was directed by Dr. Elias Hartwell, a Harvard graduate trained in European psychiatry. On March 15, 1870, exactly 1 year after Katherine's 8th birthday, she was taken from her Boston home. Disturbingly, she didn't resist. Instead, she seemed to understand the gravity of what was happening. Sitting quietly in the carriage, with that ageless, calculating expression, at one point, she broke her silence, turning to Dr. Morrison and saying, "You're going to try to photograph me, aren't you, Doctor? It will be interesting to see what your camera captures." Danvers loomed like a Gothic fortress, its pointed towers and long arched windows stretching across a mile of hillside. Though built under the philosophy of moral treatment, promising humane care and structured routine, in practice it was a warehouse for the forgotten and the dangerous. By the time Katherine arrived, over 600 patients lived there in miserable conditions. The halls reeked of sweat, urine, and disinfectant, filled with echoes of screams, clanging keys, and muttered voices. Dr. Hartwell, the hospital's chief physician, was a 52-year-old man who prided himself on progressive science. He expected Katherine to be another case of hysteria or childhood delusion, but his skepticism shattered within minutes of meeting her. Katherine walked into his office with calm authority, scanning the room and him as if she already knew everything about both. Before he could begin his exam, she recited details about 3 patients who had recently died, naming them, describing their causes of death, even recalling details only recorded in confidential files. Then, with a cold smile, she revealed intimate secrets from Hartwell's own life, childhood traumas, controversial choices in his career, even private struggles in his marriage. When he demanded to know how she could possibly know these things, Katherine only smiled wider and said softly, "I have ways of knowing about interesting people." At first, Katherine was placed in the hospital's pediatric ward, a small wing that held about 20 children with different mental disorders. The ward was overseen by Sister Margaret O'Connell, an Irish nun with 15 years of experience caring for troubled children. She believed she had seen it all until Katherine arrived. Katherine caused no outbursts, never attacked anyone, and followed the rules quietly. But her presence brought something far more unsettling. Within days, the other children began to change. 3 children who had once been stable suddenly stopped playing or speaking. Instead, they sat silently for hours, staring at the walls as if they saw something the adults could not. Emma Sullivan, a 6-year-old girl, admitted for night terrors after her parents died in a carriage accident, became obsessed with a figure she swore was always in the ward. She described it in disturbing detail, a towering woman dressed in black, with long shifting hair and eyes like hollow pits. Soon, other children described the same exact figure, same height, same black dress, the same impossible eyes. They spoke with chilling consistency, as if they were all witnessing the same unseen presence. At first, Sister Margaret dismissed it as hysteria or children feeding off each other's imaginations. But her doubts deepened when the children began speaking about things they couldn't possibly know, details of Katherine's life before she entered Danvers, private conversations with her parents, and even descriptions of the Doyle family home in Boston. One boy, 9-year-old Timothy Chen, had barely spoken since his admission, but suddenly, he began reciting detailed stories of Katherine's family in Ireland, naming relatives who had died before Katherine was even born. None of the children could have known these things. Over time, their behaviors grew more disturbing. They moved through the ward in strange formations, sat in geometric patterns at meals, and even chanted in unison in languages none of them had studied. Dr. Hartwell, now gravely concerned, became convinced Katherine was exerting some invisible influence over the other children. After 6 weeks, he made the difficult decision to move her into isolation, not because she was violent, but because of the dangerous sway she seemed to hold over others. Her new quarters were a bare room in the East Wing, a cold 3x4-meter cell with a thin iron bed, a small table, a chair, and a barred window. From there, Dr. Hartwell began more intensive observation, but Katherine was no ordinary patient. During daily sessions, she often turned the questions back on Hartwell, probing into his personal life with disturbing accuracy. She asked about his fears, his failures, and his deepest insecurities. One day in May 1870, Katherine shattered his composure. She described, in perfect detail, the childhood accident he had buried for decades, the drowning of a girl named Sarah Mitchell when they were both 12. She recalled the weather, the words spoken, and the guilt that had haunted him since. No one had ever known this. Katherine didn't just reveal secrets. She weaponized them, pressing on vulnerabilities until Hartwell questioned his own sanity. He documented other anomalies too. Katherine's room was always colder than the rest of the hospital by 4 to 6 degrees, even with the heating working. Plants left by her window withered within days. Nurses complained of splitting headaches, nausea, and vivid nightmares after tending to her. 2 guards even demanded transfers, claiming they constantly felt watched even while Katherine was asleep. By summer and fall of 1870, Hartwell expanded his studies. He subjected Katherine to memory tests, logic puzzles, historical analysis meant for scholars, not children. She passed them all with ease. In one experiment, Hartwell showed her obscure texts in dead languages. She translated them fluently. In another, he presented a photograph of a man who had died 10 years earlier in a distant city. Katherine gave his full name, the cause of death, details about his family, and even his personal habits. Information she had no way of knowing. When Dr. Hartwell checked the details Katherine provided, every single piece of information turned out to be true. But that wasn't the only ability she began to show. Soon, she demonstrated what Hartwell described as premonitions. She predicted the deaths of 3 patients with eerie precision, not just the day, but the exact circumstances. Each time, her words proved right. While her mind seemed to grow sharper and stranger, Katherine's body began to wither. Through the winter of 1870 and into 1871, her health declined in ways that no doctor could explain. She lost weight rapidly, though her appetite appeared normal. Her skin turned pale and almost translucent, bluish veins visible beneath. Her hair thickened unnaturally, dark and coarse, more like animal fur than a child's. Even more disturbing were her episodes of rigidity. Katherine would freeze for hours, standing or sitting like a statue. Her eyes stayed open, unblinking, while her pulse and breath remained steady. During these moments, the hospital grew colder. Objects shifted on their own, and staff reported dizziness, nausea, and the overwhelming sense that something unseen filled the room. When she spoke in these states, her voice no longer sounded like that of a child. Sometimes, it split into multiple tones at once, like several people speaking in harmony. Other times, it deepened into an adult register, as if other beings were using her body to speak. Through these voices, Katherine revealed impossible knowledge. She spoke of centuries-old events in vivid detail, described strangers who had died decades earlier, and made chilling predictions about future disasters, political deaths, and even personal tragedies of staff members. Again, everything she foretold came true. By May 1871, after more than a year of study, Dr. Hartwell made a decision that would define the case. He would photograph her. He had noticed something strange. Katherine didn't look the same to everyone. Some saw only a sick, pale child. Others swore she appeared twisted, older, or simply wrong. Even Hartwell himself saw her differently depending on the day. Sometimes she was just a gifted night. Other times, especially during her rigid states, he felt he was staring at something ancient and inhuman. Hartwell hoped that a photograph might settle the matter, capturing her true form once and for all. Medical photography was still new, but it was becoming common in psychiatric hospitals. Hartwell contacted James Thornton, a Boston photographer known for documenting medical cases with precision and discretion. Thornton agreed, curious about the challenge. He had photographed hundreds of patients before, but nothing could prepare him for Katherine. The session was scheduled for the morning of June 15, 1871, exactly 15 months after Katherine entered Danvers. Thornton arrived with his heavy equipment, a large format camera, tripod, glass plates, and the chemicals needed to process images on site. When he entered Katherine's room, the light struck him as odd. Even with the morning sun, shadows seemed to cling to her, as if she absorbed the light around her dot. Katherine sat quietly in a plain gray cotton dress. She didn't fidget or squirm like a normal child. Instead, she watched Thornton with an unnerving calm, almost as though she already knew exactly how the process worked. For 30 minutes of preparation, she never moved. When the camera was ready, Thornton asked her to look directly into the lens. The instant she did, something happened that he would later describe as the most disturbing experience of his entire career. He felt it, physically, like an unseen force passed straight through his body. The temperature in the room plunged, and a chill ran up his spine. More than that, he had the uncanny sense that he was not just photographing Katherine, she was photographing him. Thornton opened the shutter for a 15-second exposure. For those long seconds, Katherine's black eyes locked onto his. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was caught in some terrible exchange, that the camera was capturing more than a face. As soon as the exposure ended, he rushed to develop the glass plate in a temporary darkroom nearby. That photographic process in 1871 was delicate and dangerous, requiring toxic chemicals and absolute precision. Thornton had mastered the technique long ago, but from the moment he began developing Katherine's plate, he knew something was wrong. The chemicals reacted in ways he had never seen. Patterns formed. Strange textures spread across the glass. Parts of the image appeared too quickly, while others refused to emerge at all. When the photograph finally revealed itself, both Thornton and Dr. Hartwell went silent. Minutes passed before either spoke. The picture was Katherine, yes, sitting in the same chair, in the same dress, in the same room. On the surface, everything was correct. But beneath that ordinary likeness was something profoundly unsettling. Her eyes in the photograph didn't behave like normal eyes. No matter where you stood, they seemed to stare directly at you, and there was depth in them, natural depth, as if the plate had captured not just the surface, but endless layers behind. An abyss you could fall into if you stared too long. Her expression was just as disturbing. It wasn't the calm, blank look she'd worn during the session. It wasn't different either. It was out of sync, like the camera had caught a version of her that existed slightly outside reality. Worse, the image contained things that hadn't been there. Shadows appeared in places where no shadows should have been. Indistinct shapes lingered at the edges, vague forms that looked like other presences standing beside her. When the photograph circulated through the hospital, It sparked fascination and fear in equal measure. Hartwell convened a meeting of Danvers senior physicians to debate what they were seeing. Dr. William Foster, the hospital's second most senior doctor, argued it was a technical issue: bad lighting, flawed chemicals, or some quirk of Thornton's equipment. But when Thornton returned days later and shot control images with the exact same camera, chemicals, and room, those photographs came out perfectly normal. Katherine's remained unique. Dr. Margaret Sinclair, one of the few women in psychiatry at the time, suggested something radical. She theorized that Katherine might suffer from an unknown neurological disorder that extended beyond her mind, and altering how her body interacted with the world itself. She cited European reports of psychotic patients who showed signs of telekinesis, reviewing Katherine's case: objects moving without contact, sudden temperature drops, effects on plants and people. Sinclair suggested the child might be producing unusual bioelectric fields strong enough to disturb her surroundings. Hartwell, fascinated but cautious, proposed experiments to test for measurable physical energy, temperature changes, magnetism, even experimental energy photography. The debate only grew louder when copies of the photograph reached specialists in Boston, New York, and even Europe. Every expert agreed on one point: they had never seen anything like it. Dr. Heinrich Zimmermann, a German psychiatrist famed for his studies of hysteria, offered a chilling theory. He believed Katherine suffered from an extreme form of multiple personality disorder, so extreme that her alternate selves physically manifested in ways visible to the camera, but invisible to the human eye. Whatever the explanation, something in the act of being photographed accelerated her decline. Katherine had been wasting away slowly, but now the process raced forward. Her catatonic freezes stretched from hours to entire days. She remained motionless, unresponsive, yet fully aware, her eyes tracking people silently, as if she were watching something beyond them, and the disturbances worsened. Her room froze to the point of ice forming on the windows in midsummer. Objects hurled across the space with violent force. Staff reported whispers in unknown languages, glimpses of dark figures in the corners, crushing waves of nausea and vertigo. By August 1871, Sister Margaret O'Connell, who had devoted herself to Katherine's care, begged for transfer. In her request, she wrote, "I can no longer in good conscience continue working near that child. Whatever's happening to her is spreading, and I fear for all our safety." Katherine's body was wasting away to nothing. Her skin had gone so thin it revealed the veins and tendons beneath. Her hair turned pitch black and grew at an unnatural rate, spilling long and coarse over her shoulders. In September, she entered her final catatonic state. This time she did not move for 6 weeks without food, without water, without speech. Medically, she should have died in days. Yet somehow her body kept going. Her eyes stayed open the entire time, following people around the room. Sometimes her lips moved faintly, as though whispering to someone invisible. Finally, on the morning of November 2nd, 1871, Katherine Doyle died. She was just 9 years old. Hartwell was present and noted how strangely peaceful it was. For the first time in months, her room was silent. No whispers, no shadows, no sudden chill. Katherine simply closed her eyes and never opened them again. At the exact moment Katherine Doyle died, the temperature in her hospital room rose to normal for the first time in months. But her death didn't end. The mystery, it only deepened it. Her autopsy, performed by Dr. Hartwell with a Boston colleague, revealed anomalies no one had ever seen. Her organs were flawless, showing no sign of disease or deterioration. Her brain displayed a bizarre mix of developments, some regions far advanced for her age, others shockingly underdeveloped, almost embryonic. Even stranger, her body resisted decay. Without preservation chemicals, her remains stayed unnervingly intact for weeks, as though the natural process of decomposition had paused. When she was finally buried in the hospital cemetery, Unsettling events surrounded her grave. No plants grew directly above it. The soil stayed colder than the rest of the grounds. Visitors reported a heavy, sickening feeling whenever they passed near. Hartwell never stopped studying her. He published multiple papers, not because they offered answers, but because they captured phenomena that shredded the boundaries of 19th century medicine. Katherine's photograph became one of the most infamous images in medical history, debated, copied, and studied across Europe and America. Specialists tried to explain its unsettling qualities with theories ranging from chemical flaws to optical tricks, but none could account for the psychological weight it carried for anyone who looked at it. Even decades later, researchers visited the Danvers archives to examine her records. In 1923, more than 50 years after her death, the famed psychologist Carl Jung studied her photograph and files. He suggested Katherine might represent an extreme case of synchronicity, a human focal point where normally separate realities converged. Modern science has reopened the case with fresh theories. Some neurologists suggest Katherine suffered from a rare form of temporal lobe epilepsy, a variant that distorts memory and perception of time. This could explain her impossible knowledge, reframed as cryptomnesia, hidden memories, surfacing in ways that seem supernatural. Harvard neurobiologist Dr. Sarah Chen has proposed another possibility, that Katherine unconsciously processed environmental cues at a heightened level, interpreting micro-expressions, smells, and subtle sensory data so precisely that it mimicked psychic knowledge. Others point to extreme savant syndrome combined with dissociation, multiple personalities, each holding different fragments of knowledge and ability. This might explain her sudden command of languages or expertise in subjects she had never studied. And yet, none of these theories account for the full reality of her case: the plunging temperatures, the violent object movements, the photograph that captured what no eye could see. Some researchers now speculate Katherine may have generated bioelectric anomalies in usual electromagnetic fields capable of disturbing both the human nervous system and photographic equipment. Whatever the cause, Katherine Doyle left a legacy that has shaped psychiatry, parapsychology, and even popular culture. Her case became one of the most thoroughly documented medical mysteries of the 19th century, and Dr. Hartwell's meticulous records set a new standard for documenting the unexplainable. Over 150 years later, her story still unsettles us. Her photograph still stares back with eyes that feel impossibly deep, carrying a wisdom no child should have possessed. Modern theories explain parts of the puzzle, but none solve it completely. Katherine Doyle remains a reminder that science doesn't yet hold all the answers, that human experience may stretch into realms we cannot measure. Perhaps the greatest lesson of her case is the value of honest observation. Hartwell and his team didn't force explanations. They recorded what they saw with precision, leaving behind a record that continues to challenge researchers. Today, her photograph remains the most chilling artifact of all visual testimony that still raises questions about the limits of reality, the mysteries of the mind, and the fragile line between science and the unknown. Katherine Doyle lived only 9 years, yet her legacy continues to haunt and inspire, reminding us that some mysteries are larger than life and that not every question was meant to have an answer. If Katherine Doyle's story left you intrigued, and you want to hear more cases like this, medical mysteries that defy explanation, eerie old photographs with hidden secrets, and chilling tales that science never fully solved, then make sure to subscribe to the channel. We have dozens of stories waiting in the archives. 19th century patients with impossible abilities, medical photographs that revealed more than they should have, and historical mysteries that remain unsolved even today. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of these extraordinary cases buried deep in the forgotten history of medicine.